There's a line in the first movie in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, a line that I think is very descriptive of something that we experience today, perhaps descriptive of many of our lives today. It spoke to me, this line spoke to me when I first heard it, when the movie was released back in 2002, and it's something that I have just remembered. For some reason, I've remembered it ever since then, and maybe it's because it spoke to me, and I could identify with it, and actually I could feel it in terms of what it was saying. It's at the beginning of the movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, and it's when the wizard Gandalf in this movie has come to the Shire where all of the hobbits live, and he has come to celebrate with Bilbo Baggins his 111th birthday, or something like that. That's a way beyond the normal lifespan for a hobbit, but it has to do with the ring that he has possession of that has given him. You don't want to go into that. But anyway, that's another part of the story, okay? But it's at the beginning of the movie. And Gandalf has just arrived at Bilbo's house, and he's in there having tea with him. And so they're in the middle of this conversation, and in the middle of this conversation, Bilbo says this rather wistfully. He wistfully begins to tell Gandalf that he says, I think I'm going to go away. I'm going to leave. He begins to tell him that he's just tired. He's tired, and he needs to go somewhere where he doesn't have to deal with all of his relatives. And the scene just prior to this was when the Sackville Bagginses came to the door and were banging on the door wanting to get in because they were angry at Bilbo for something. And he didn't let them in, and he was hiding from them. And so this is the scene after that. And so he's telling this, he says, I want to get away. I don't want to have to deal with this. I don't want to have to deal with all these hobbits who keep coming and wonder why I'm living so long and thinking that I might have all kinds of treasures hidden and they want to know about it and that kind of thing. And then he kind of stops. And he looks at Gandalf and he says, I feel thin, Gandalf. I feel thin, sort of like butter spread over too much bread. That's the image that sticks in my mind. Sort of like butter spread over too much bread. Let me ask you, have you ever felt that way? Like butter spread over too much bread? That life has been so busy, you've been involved in so many things, doing so many things, that's what you feel like. You have to go so many places, you have to give attention to so many things that you feel like butter spread over too much bread. This morning is message number 6 in our series of Becoming Who God Made Us to Be, and I want to talk about the necessity of having breathing space and creating breathing spaces in our busy lives, of maintaining the rhythms of work and rest in this life. Because friends, feeling thin, feeling like butter spread over too much bread will never help you and me to become the people that God has created us to be. As a matter of fact, if we are too busy in life, and if we're feeling thin, that kind of reality will distract us from and tire us out from ever pursuing that relationship with God and pursuing that becoming what Jesus wants us to be. We won't have the energy for it. And so this morning I want to reflect a little bit on this story of Daniel that was read for us, because when I look at the story of Daniel, when I look at Daniel and all that he was involved in, what I think is this: he could have felt like butter spread over too much bread. He could have felt that way, except we don't see a trace of that in him at all. In those 6 chapters that talk about Daniel and the stories that and the experiences that he went through, we don't see that at all. But we could have seen that in him, because after all, he was a guy who was in exile. Along with all of the other Israelites, he was in exile. He was in a foreign country. He was not at home. His homeland had been destroyed. And he had been in captivity for a long, long time. He'd been in this foreign land for a long, long time. At this point, in the passage that Glenn read for us, at that point, he was in captivity under the 3rd king. He came into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar. He was in captivity under his son Belshazzar, and now there's King Darius or Darius. He's under him, the third king. He's been there a long, long time and been in exile for a long time. Now, for Daniel, being in exile, it didn't mean that he was sitting around doing nothing, twiddling his thumbs, okay? Under each of these rulers, Daniel had risen in prominence in this foreign country, and he had significant responsibilities in that land. At this point in the story, once again, Daniel was one of the 3 administrators under King Darius, and these 3 administrators, they had 120 satraps working under them. Satraps were provincial governors or regional governors, and they were accountable to these 3 administrators. And these 3 administrators, they were responsible for them in terms of production in whatever area they were responsible for, and responsible for them in terms of them carrying out the king's wishes. So Daniel would have had probably at least 40 of them. If there were 3 of them, he would have had 40 of them that he was responsible for and who were accountable to him. So life was probably busy for Daniel. He wasn't just sitting around wondering what to do. And then on top of all of that, because of Daniel's excellent record, because of his exceptional qualities, it says in the passage, the king had a plan to make him the administrator over all 120 of those governors. All 120. Life was getting busier for Daniel. And then to top that off, because the king had announced he was going to do this, Daniel had to deal with his colleagues, with the Babylonian administrators, who all resented him because of what the king was going to do with him, and who were jealous of him, and they hated him, and they wanted to get rid of him. And so Daniel, you see, had a whole lot of things coming at him day by day by day. So that's why I say I think he could have been feeling like butter spread over too much bread. But that's not what we see in him. That's not what we see at all. What we see here when you read these first chapters, what we see is a man who seems to have had some kind of depth or some kind of anchor to his soul, such that in spite of what he had to deal with in life, he never got feeling thin. You don't ever get that impression of him when you read those first 6 chapters. You read those stories, and you get the sense that here's a man who was never out of breath. You get the sense that here was a man who never panicked about anything, who was not, you could never find him running from one thing to the other, trying to get things done, and in a frantic kind of hurried state, living his life day by day. On the contrary, we find a man who seemed to be unhurried and unharried. We see a man who seemed to kind of be at peace with himself in the midst of all this whirlwind of stuff that was going on around him. And it's in this passage that Glenn read for us that I think we find the reason why. Here's the story. This particular day was a crisis point in Daniel's life. This is the story that leads to Daniel actually being thrown into the den of lions. We didn't read the whole story, but that's where it goes. He gets thrown into the den of lions. See, he had been promoted, and these jealous fellow governors had kind of tricked King Darius into issuing a decree that if anyone in his kingdom bowed down to any other god or any other person and prayed to them or worshiped them, then that person would be thrown into the den of lions. I suspect that King Darius kind of liked that. It kind of stroked his ego. Yeah, I'm the one to be worshipped. And so he issued the decree. And these guys, you see, knew Daniel's practices. They knew his devotion to God. And they had seen him bowing down, worshiping God, praying to God 3 times a day. And so their plan was to see that after the edict was proclaimed, see that, go tell the king, and then have Daniel thrown into the lion's den, and they'd be rid of that problem. So this was all going on in the life of Daniel. But what I want us to notice in this passage is Daniel's response to hearing the news about this. It's in verse 10 of chapter 6. Just listen to this. I want you to get the feel of this. It says this, "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the window opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to God just as he had done before." Let me ask you, do you get any sense here that Daniel, when he heard that news, that he rushed home in a panic, scared for his life, out of breath as he ran upstairs into that room, slamming the door and locking it so nobody could get in and get him, and then just falling on his knees and pleading with God, "Lord, come and rescue me because of this decree. Do you get that sense? I don't. Not at all. Listen to it again. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the window opened toward Jerusalem 3 times a day. He got down on his knees, prayed, giving thanks to God just as he had done before. There's the phrase right there that I think gives us the clue. Just as he had done before. A regular, normal day for Daniel, even though the storm was coming. A regular, normal day. Yes, he did ask God for help, because in the very next verse, these jealous administrators, they, remember when they went as a group to Daniel's home to see if he was going to do this, and sure enough he did, and it says they found him praying and asking God for help. But my point is this, he was asking for help just as he had done before. This was nothing new for Daniel, to pray and ask for help. He had done it all throughout his life. I suspect that when King Nebuchadnezzar wanted him to interpret the dream, Daniel prayed and asked God for help. With Belshazzar, with the writing on the wall, he prayed and asked God for help. And I suspect with all of the responsibilities that he had in that kingdom, and all of the choices he had to make and the decisions he had to make, I suspect that the 3 times a day that he was on his knees, he was asking God for help in those things. But my point is, it was nothing out of the ordinary. And I believe that's why we find Daniel as this man who seemed to be unhurried and unharried in the midst of this whirlwind and this storm that was either on him at that point or that was coming in the future. It's in that little phrase, just as he had done before. It was, friends, his ongoing practice to take a breather. I want you to think of it that way. To take a breather 3 times a day, worship God, and talk to God about all these things. He took a breather. So I just want to camp on that phrase just for a moment and say a couple of things about it. A couple of things from that phrase and from Daniel's life that speak to our growth in Jesus Christ and us becoming the person that God made us to be. The first thing is this. Very simple. We have to have breathing space to grow. We have to have breathing space to grow. And if we don't have breathing space, then, friends, we need to create it in our lives. Breathing space is essential. Here's how I mean that. 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, I took my last week of vacation. And specifically, I took it to go cut my wood for next winter, not this coming winter, but for the next winter. And so I did that, through the week. And when I would go out for the day or for the half day to work at, clearing places where I could fall the trees and then felling the trees and limbing them and all that kind of stuff, when I would do that, I would often stop and take a breather. You know what I mean? Yeah. Actually, the older I get, the more I have to stop and take a breather. I've noticed that. I used to be able to just go right straight for the whole day. Now I might do an hour, and then I got to stop and take a breather. But I have to stop and take a breather. Now, taking a breather does 2 things for you. Taking a breather, first of all, relates to something in the past, and then it relates to something in the future. Taking a breather, first of all, gives you physical rest from what you've just been doing, working hard, and it gives you physical rest from what you've just been doing. And then it gives you physical renewal for what you have to do next. See, after I would take a rest, I was ready to go again. Take a breather, and I'm ready to go again. If I hadn't taken a breather, then I would have worn myself out and not accomplished much of anything, if you just keep going and not take a breather. That's the purpose of it. You get tired and you take a breather. And when you work hard physically, this taking a breather is essential in order to maximize efficiency, because if you don't, you're just going to wear out. So that's the way it is with physical work. I think that's the same thing in life in general. If I don't have breathing space built into my life, if I don't have breathing space, I would say on a daily basis and even on a weekly basis, I'm not going to talk about a yearly basis, but in those kinds of things, then I'm on a course that is not good for me, because I will just wear out. I will wear out physically, I will wear out mentally, I will wear out spiritually if I don't take those breathers. So what is a breathing space for us as believers? Well, breathing space, friends, is that place that you retreat to. It's that place where you go to, and I think when you go there, you find at least 3 things. You will find physical rest, you will find mental quietness, and you will find spiritual renewal. It's that place where you are away from everything else and focusing on God and rest. It's that place where you come apart from the world so that you don't fall apart in the world. It's that place of resting. It's that place of renewal. And friends, I believe that's essential for our growth in Christ-likeness and in becoming the people that God made us to be, because without that, all we will do is wear out. We will wear out. See, this world is quite happy to keep us busy. Isn't that right? You can be going 24/7, 365 days of the year in all kinds of activities and pursuits and going here and going there and chasing after this and chasing after that. I think there are many, many people in the world today, and this might be you, I don't know, many, many people in this community today who feel like butter spread over too much bread just because of all the activity. But we need the breathing space. Actually, friends, the truth is this, that the need for breathing space is a need that God has built into us as human beings. As I said, we're not created to work and go 24/7, 365 days of the year. God, friends, has built the rhythm of work and rest and work and rest and work and rest into us. It's part of our nature as humans. It's part of this world that we are in. Actually, there's a word in the Bible for it. It's called Sabbath. It's called Sabbath. On the seventh day of creation, we always say that God rested, but the other reality is this, that on the seventh day of creation, creation itself rested. Creation itself rested. So that rhythm is built into creation, and consequently it's built into us because we're made out of what? The dust of the ground. It's built into us. The command of God that he gave to his people was this: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, to keep it separate, to keep it different than every other day. He says 6 days you will labor and you will do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Sabbath, friends, is a breathing place, a breathing space. It's a place for physical and mental rest and for renewal in the Lord. Now, Daniel, I suspect, being a God-fearing Jew, the God-fearing Jew that he was, I suspect that he kept the weekly Sabbath faithfully. But what we see here in Daniel is that he also kept other small s Sabbaths through the week. 3 times a day, he would faithfully retreat from his work. He would retreat from his work, and he would retreat to his prayer room. He would come apart from the world and all the whirlwind that was going around him, and he would shut himself in with Yahweh. And it says here he would do that to pray and give thanks to God. You can call that a mini Sabbath if you want, a mini Sabbath, a breather in the midst of the day. It was here that I believe Daniel would get reoriented to ultimate reality. It was there that he would get turned right side up, anything that was turned wrong side up or upside down. It was there that he could meet the Lord and have his day changed. It's a place of rest and renewal. So here's the deal on this. Here's the deal. I cannot move forward and move toward becoming who God created me to be without that kind of thing, without taking those breathers on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and maybe even more than that, but having those times. We maybe need to, we can't sing this, I'm not going to sing it, but that hymn, Take Time to Be Holy, you know that hymn? It got it right. The second verse of that hymn says this: take time to be holy. That's not talking about take time to be morally pure, although that might be the result, but it's really saying take time to separate yourself. Take time to be holy. Take time to be holy. The world rushes on, but spend much time in secret with Jesus alone. By looking to Jesus, like him thou shalt be, and thy friends in thy conduct his likeness will see. Take time to be holy. Take time to take a breather. Be with God. That's a primary element in the pathway to becoming who God created us to be. Let me ask you this. Do you have breathing space built into your days in that way? Is Sabbath something that you are doing today, just as you did it yesterday, and as you did it the day before, and as you did it the day before, and as you did it the day before, and as you did it the day before? Is it a way of life for you and me? We have to have it if we're going to grow. That's one thing I want to point out. Second thing is this, and this is, it's this. If we don't have the breathing space in the calm days, then it will be hard to find it in the crisis days. If we don't have that breathing space established in the calm days, then it's going to be hard to find it in the crisis days. I remember mentioning to you a long time ago in a message about the old Fordson Major diesel tractor that my dad had when we were growing up, the old blue thing. And I remember telling you that it was a tractor that didn't have a shred of brakes on it at all. As long as I can remember, there were no brakes whatsoever on that old tractor. And so you really had to know how to, work that thing. You really had to know how to drive that thing. And you really had to know what you had to do when operating it so you didn't kill yourself or didn't kill someone else. You really had to know. And one of those things that you really had to know related to when you were coming down a hill. Especially if you were coming down the hill behind the house. If you're coming from the woods with a load of hardwood on the trailer behind you, you had to know how to get down that hill on a tractor with no brakes. See, with no brakes, the only thing that would bring you down the hill slow enough was the back pressure of the diesel engine itself. What that meant was this, that at the top of the hill, before you started to come down the hill, you had to stop, and you had to put that tractor in a low gear. Normally, second gear in low range would take you down the hill with a load of wood. You had to put it in there, and you had to keep it in that gear all the way down the hill. And if you didn't, you were doomed. You were doomed. Because the reality was this: if you didn't get it in the right gear at the top of the hill when everything was calm, then you certainly would not get it in the right gear going down the hill when it was going too fast. Because as soon as you would take it out of gear into neutral, you could never get it into another gear when it was moving. You were doomed. And that's what I'm saying here about this breathing space that we need to have in our lives. If we do not have the regular practice of breathing spaces on a daily basis during those calm days, then it will be hard to find that breathing space in the crisis day when we're going down the hill and things seem to be out of control. This particular day in the life of Daniel was a crisis day. But as we've already said, it didn't cause Daniel to panic and rush home and plead to God for help. Yeah, he did come home. He did come to the Lord and ask for help. But it was nothing new. It was not occasioned by the crisis. He came home just as he had always been doing. He got it in gear at the top of the hill. And so he could go down the hill more slowly and in a proper order. He established the practice in the calm days, and it served him well in the crisis times. Have you ever noticed how we tend to come to Jesus more, and we tend to want him more when we're facing trials and tribulations than we do when life is going along fine? You ever notice how I do that? I do that, and all of you do that as well. Life's going along fine. It's almost like I don't need the Lord. We never say that, but it's like, then when the tribulation comes along, it's, oh, I need to pray about this, that kind of thing. If I, for example, one day were to get real bad news, if I were one day, for example, to be shocked by a completely unexpected yet very serious diagnosis of cancer and a not-so-hopeful prognosis that said I didn't have that long to live, if I got that kind of thing, you could bet that I would probably start praying and seeking the Lord to a degree that I had not done before. You can bet that I would. And so would you. Someone once characterized it in this kind of way, that we often breeze along on the highway of life doing just fine, thank you very much, on our own, until we have a flat tire along the way. And then we say, well, Jesus, you better be in the trunk there for me because I want to take you out now and let you run this car for a little while until I get things fixed. And then I'm going to put you back in the trunk again until I need you again. That's an overstatement of things, but it does highlight the tendency of our human hearts, which is to seek the Lord more when the going gets tough than when life is going well because we think we can handle it at that point. And it's fine to come to Jesus. It's fine to come to God in the crisis. We have to do that. And the Lord wants us to do that. And the Lord responds to that when we call out to Him in the midst of our great need. But what I'm saying here is this, that it is much easier to come to God and find Him in the crises when we've already been regularly coming and finding Him in the non-crisis times in our lives. Isn't that right? Daniel, I believe, didn't come home that day saying, man, this is a crisis. I need to go to the Lord and pray. I need to go to the Lord and really pray. And he didn't say that because, friends, his practice every day was to go to the Lord and really pray. We have to have that breathing space in the calm days if we're going to benefit from it in the not-so-calm days. Then the final thing I want to say, and I'm not going to talk about this, I'm just going to give you some homework. I just want to say a breathing space is a change room. A breathing space is a change room. It's where change into becoming our true selves can take place more than anywhere else in our lives. So I'm not going to talk about this, but I'm going to give you homework for you to see this yourself. What I want you to do this week is I want you to take the book of Daniel and I want you to read the first 6 chapters. I want you to have a sit down, a single sit down, and I want you to read the first 6 chapters of Daniel. Now, you can read all 12 chapters if you want, but after chapter 6, all you get into is Daniel's own dreams and visions about the future, and that's kind of hard to slog through. The first 6 chapters are narrative. They are the stories of Daniel, those stories that we all learned in Sunday school, the familiar stories. And what I want to say is it's very interesting reading. You're not going to be bored when you read this, so I want to encourage you to read it. But here's what I want you to try and take note of when you're reading it. I want you to notice how in all of these encounters that Daniel had, I want you to notice how he was always his true self. And he was always true to his own heart and true to what was right. I want you to notice how he was free to say what he believed. He was free to say what he thought. He was free to speak the truth, even if it was going to harm him in some way and it was hard to say it. And he was free to do it with no fear about the consequences to himself. He didn't worry about that. That wasn't an issue with him. So he didn't shade the truth. He didn't wear a mask like you are wearing to hide who he really was. It was just, I was just joking about your physical mask, all right? But he didn't put a mask on and hide behind that and become a false self in sharing anything and in any of those stories. There was no need to hide anything. And what I want you to see is get a feel for this man as a man who served God faithfully with integrity and with a true heart. The real Daniel. Because here's what I believe. It all goes back to that little phrase that we were looking at. Just as he had done before. I believe he was able to be his true self because in that space that he carved out for God each day of his life, in that breathing space, he became secure in God's love for him. He became secure in his understanding of who he was, who God made him to be, secure enough not to have to be anyone else or anything else in his daily life. When I started going with the lady I'm married to right now, she was attending, a member of the Florenceville Baptist Church, and I'd be up there, and on the weekends, of course, she'd go to Sunday school. And I don't think we ever sang this song in our Sunday school, but they sang it up there. It was a little ditty called Dare to be a Daniel. Any of you know that? And it goes like this: Dare to be a Daniel. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to have a purpose firm. And dare to make it known. I think that's it, right, Tawa? Yeah, I kind of had it down here. Cheated. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to have a purpose firm. And dare to make it known. See, the only way that can be true of you and me is if we are aware of who we are, we're comfortable in our own skin, we're not hiding behind any mask, and what you see is the true self. We can then dare to stand alone, to have a purpose firm, and to make it known. Dare to be a Daniel. Breathing spaces. Breathing spaces. You have to have a breathing space. We have to have that breathing space in order to grow. We have to develop it in the calm days if it's going to serve us well in the crisis days. And we have to have that space in order to change. That would be my prayer for you. That would be my prayer for us. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel. What we're going to do right now, I'm going to invite the deacons to come, because we're coming to the Lord's table. What I want to say about the Lord's table is this, that this, is a breathing space. When we come to the Lord's table, we come and separate ourselves. We come apart from. We come and we focus not on the world, not on the things that are out around us, not on things that are going here, but we focus on Jesus and we focus on his sacrifice. We withdraw. And actually, we need to see this as a time to withdraw for rest and renewal. Rest in the sense of surrendering everything to Jesus, giving it to him because he takes it all for us. And renewal in the sense of receiving from Jesus through faith. New life, renewal, filling of the Holy Spirit. This is a resting place for us. This is a resting place for us as a congregation. We are people friends who are truly loved by God. We need to see that. We are truly loved. God loves us. He loves us because of who we are, because we're made in his image. He loves us in spite of who we are, because we're sinners. And he loves us just as we are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He invites us to come. And he invites us to come to this table because he loves us. Let me just read, as we prepare, I want to just read this passage. I guess I'll come down and read this. In 2 Corinthians, as we prepare, 2 Corinthians, and then we're going to go to 1 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Verse 14, it says, "For Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation, that God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation, that we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. And then this, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God, so that in him we might become the people that God intended for us to be when he created us, but that sin got in the way of. And he has removed that, and we are moving toward what he wants us to be.